Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're talking about something that is way long overdue. So over a month and a half ago now, probably longer than that, one of my viewers, Akuma Shogun, asked me to build the Devil Buster that Nero wears in the new Devil May Cry 5. And I built it, I finished it about the time that the game came out. And I was late to playing the game, so I didn't actually realize that when it came out, there's actually a few little extra designs and stuff like that. You could tinker with it yourself and design it to your own liking. I didn't put any scratch marks or anything on it. I just made it look like it was brand new. But feel free to do whatever you want with yours. This was such a hellish video to make. You know, for most of you who follow me, you know that I spent a month on the road. After thinking I was only going to be gone for 2 weeks, I actually spent an entire month. And if you follow me on social media, I came back that week, made a video about my trip, and then had to go back out for another week to do another show. You know, between not being here for an entire month and being halfway done the project, and then having to come back and figure out where I was, to, you know, the voiceover, the editing, again, there's over 9 hours of me just, like, you know, putting this thing together, watching paint dry, this and that. Going through that footage was not easy, so I managed to compress it into like a 50-minute thing. With this involved, it'll probably be a little bit longer, but I really did try for you guys. That being said, Akuma Shogun, now that I know that there's a con going on every week, I really hope you did not miss your convention yet. This is the video, you're finally getting it. No more talking, we're just going to jump straight into it. Please enjoy. So without further ado, let's make the Devil Buster from Devil May Cry. Alright, so here's a list of the things you'll need. Some super glue I got from the dollar store. I use this for most of my projects because it's fast to dry. This is just a blue see-through folder. We're going to use that for all the blue parts in the project. I also bought that for $1 at the dollar store. Scissors and X-Acto knife, because you're going to be doing some cutting. Some tape. It really doesn't matter what kind you use. Preferably something a little more durable than that see-through school tape. Now these I found at the dollar store around springtime. They'll be selling them all throughout summer. It's like those Christmas lights, but they're all white, so that's perfect for what I need. I also only paid $2 for them. This is a camping mat I also found at the dollar store for $3. You might have to find something else, like a yoga mat, but this is just a long piece of foam and it was perfect for the project. If you can't find anything yourself, I'll try to leave a link in the description. Your standard paints. I only have red out here, but you'll also be using silver and black. Dishwashing gloves. I originally tried to spray paint a pair of yellow gloves, but that didn't work out. The paint just chipped off. So if you can, just find a pair of black ones. It'll save you a lot of time. And varnish. While this isn't completely necessary, this actually went a long way in this project. The varnish helped give it a shiny color and made it look more realistic. It also prevented the paint from chipping off. Alright, so first thing you're going to do is roll out the mat and try to wrap it around your arm. Try to get a good feel for where you want it to stop around the elbow, and give yourself a little extra space when tracing it out. Trust me, just because you can wrap your arm around it doesn't mean it's going to fit. Don't forget you have to slide in and out of this thing, so do give yourself a little wiggle room. Cut it out and cut off all the excess. You try to make the lines as straight as possible because you're going to be taping these two sections together. Once you figure it out, go ahead and tape the two ends together. If it fits nice and smoothly, go ahead and tape it off all completely. Don't worry about the tape design, because this is just the base. There'll be plenty covering this up later. I don't want any mistakes, so I'm going to put on a wad of tape. Next up, pull out your Christmas lights and see how far along it goes. Put it towards the base of where your elbow will be, so you have an idea of how big you need to make that red spot. Find something that you can wrap around it, and then put a line around so you know how far you can actually go. The top end is going to be how far you can actually make your blue lights. So I'm using a blue sheet of foam here. And I'll be using that for the grate on the interior. While it's a small detail, it actually looks really nice if you do it properly. You can find your own method of doing this, but I decided to take the time and just make it as nice as possible. Once you measure it out, cut it up, you're going to need 5 in total. 1 for every finger. I really gotta stress here, if you find a better way to do this, or if you have a particularly better method, definitely go with that. This was one of the longer parts of the project. Just measuring everything up, giving it that railroad kind of look. Now if you see inside, there's a bit of a triangle angle going on. So I just kind of loosely did that, just so I could get an idea of what it would look like. Later I'll actually make the edges sharper. Using both the scissors and the X-Acto knife, I make precision cuts on the interior and exterior. That way I can get a particular design. With a lot of time and precision, I eventually get the desired look. For the sake of this, I'll just call them railroad tracks because they kind of look like railroad tracks to me. This is a long and tedious process, but it's totally worth it because it comes out looking really good. Now that I have this, just do this 4 more times. You can either just lay it on top and draw it, or do what I did, is just paint over it. The paint doesn't really affect the overall thing because we're going to be painting the silver later, but this lets me know where I need to cut to make them look all the same. Sure, it looks a little blotchy, but it's just a point of reference. Once you cut them all out, place them down and just put them somewhere else for now. Now get your Christmas light and your arm back and try to measure how thick the battery is going to be when you combine it with the arm. I can't give you exact measurements because you probably won't end up using the same material as me, so just go ahead and eyeball it as best you can. Once you know how many layers it's going to take, go ahead and cut those layers out. Don't forget to leave a space for where the battery will go. For me, I think I did about 3 or 4 layers. I know I showed you 3 there, but I'm pretty sure I ended up doing 1 more. Stack them on top of each other to give them that height and thickness. And when you're ready,
use the super glue. I'm using the super glue because it glues the fastest. It takes about 10 seconds, I want to say, but I'm not going to use it the full way. Just use it to get it down. Once it's down, you can switch over to the hot glue. But just to get it in place, I would use the super glue. Once that's done, pull out the hot glue and just start gluing inside. This is more of a filler glue than anything else. Cut off any extra if you have any. It's better to have extra than to not, because then you can work backwards from there. Once you're certain you have enough, go ahead and glue it on. Glue it little by little as you wrap it around. Make sure your measurements are final, because this will be really tough to take off if not. As you can see, I've left a space for my battery. I'm 100% sure it's going to work, so I'm ready to glue it on permanently. Next, let's go back to what I call the train tracks. We're ready to paint these guys. I'm going to do a nice coat of silver paint. I did add a bit of black to this paint to make it a darker look. You'll probably hear me say this a lot throughout the video, but I tend to do 3 coats of paint for everything I do. Don't forget to do the corners and the insides. Next, let's move on to the blue filter that we'll be using. Once the train tracks are dried up, go ahead and place them on to the blue thing. You won't be needing a lot of the blue filter, so you can go right ahead and just use as much space as you want. Now here's where I made my first mistake, and I will leave this in the video so you don't repeat this mistake. I thought I could use Elmer's glue and just glue it on, and then later just cut around it. What I did not know is that it takes over 24 hours in order for the glue to dry. Also, it really didn't work, so I ended up using my super glue after all. I used my super glue literally for everything. The whole thing was falling apart. Elmer's glue was not a good call for this project. So go ahead and skip that step and go straight to the super glue. Don't use a lot, because this stuff is really powerful and you don't want it leaking out of the sides. Once you're down to your last one, go ahead and cut it out. Same deal, you'll probably have to use some super glue. Cut as close as you can to the edges so you don't have to do that later. Look how that just flops around like that. You definitely do not need Elmer's glue. Go ahead and go straight to the super glue. You may have to do a repeating trip to the dollar store for more glue. Next up, we're going to start working on the claws. Go ahead and trace your finger. Just by eyeballing it, see how big you would want your finger to be inside the claw. One thing that I wish I did differently is that I made the claws a little bigger. When I did them at the time, they looked pretty big, so I just went with that. You're going to make 2 different size claws. One for your 3 inner fingers, and 2 smaller ones for your thumb and pinky. Once you find the right size, go ahead and trace it out a second time and make it a bit smaller. This one will be for your pinky and thumb. Once you have sizes you're happy with, go ahead and trace it on the foam mat. I guess I'll call it the foam mat for this video, but it's like a yoga mat. Honestly, I was really lucky that they had this at the dollar store because they almost never have it during the winter time. You're going to end up cutting out 6 of these in total. The foam was bent in a certain way, so I took advantage of that and made 3 on the left side and 3 on the right side. Once you're finished, hot glue those babies together. So a trick that I do that I don't really recommend is when I'm forming the glue, I'll wet my finger and then slide my finger along the glue. I did burn myself a few times, so I wouldn't really suggest it. I ended up using the side of the glue gun with the heat to help give the glue less of a rounded shape and more of like a sharp edge. It doesn't look amazing, but it's better than if it was just, glued on there. So I used the heat from the glue gun to give it a bit more of a sharp shape. And there we go, the gray claws. Using a piece of paper, or in this case, multiple cue cards, I made the shape of the red, I guess, finger part. If you would call the gray part a fingernail, then this would be, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, but it's on there. So go ahead and wrap it around the exterior and then trace out a design of your choice. Make sure it looks good and then continue on. Because I exaggerated the shape a bit more, I can take the liberty of not having to use up the entire foam. With a piece of red foam you can easily find at the dollar store or some craft store, go ahead and trace out a few of these. 3 for the big ones and 2 for the smaller ones. You may have to do some modifications for it to fit just right. Now I know they're red, but if you really want it to look good, you'll paint it red on top of that. So even if the paint chips off, it'll still be red underneath. I want to give it more of a dark red, so I went ahead and painted it, of course, 3 layers. Also on the gray claws, just paint where your fingers will go in, because that technically needs to look red. When you're all set, go ahead and paint the claws with a nice coat of silver. You don't have to go all the way to the edge because that'll be covered with the red casing anyway. I don't know what you would call that. Pop out that varnish. And begin painting over the red once it's dried. I'm telling you, it kind of makes it look like a car almost, like a glossy car. Once you're all set, get ready to glue this on. Make sure you get it just right, because you don't want to mess up this part. I always like to leave a little bit of excess so I can cut it off later instead of having too little. Gluing this requires a bit of patience because this does take a while to get right. Always take your time rather than rush it. Cut off all the excess so you look pretty good there. Right on, that's a good looking claw. Now do this with the rest of them. I cut up a few pieces of foam and put them in between the fingers so that they kind of mold into the shape that I'll have my fingers in there. You don't want to leave them flat necessarily. Now glue the tips together so there's no way that they'll come undone. Once it's done drying, paint the base part red. This I kind of cheated, I didn't use varnish. Back to the arm, I'm ready to start gluing the top part on. Since I know how big the battery is going to be, I've left enough space there. There will be a piece that overlaps the top of the battery so no one can see it. Hot glue it on and make sure you have enough to go around completely. Arm still slides on easy enough, so I guess I'm doing pretty good. Next up, you're going to put dots wherever you see your fingers line up, because that's going to be where the lights will be placed. Get your lights, untangle them, and make sure they work. I got batteries in there, but the way I'm going to make it, I'll make it in order to be able to take the batteries out when they die. Because the wire's coming out of the same edge as the switch, I have to tape it down and let it pass through the back. Go ahead and squeeze that in. It goes in and out easy enough. Now I gotta deal with all this extra cord. I give a little bit and then tie it up. That's in case I ever need to pull it out to change the batteries. It gives me a little bit of resistance, but I'd rather have that than have the batteries die on me and not be able to change them. Now this is where good old duct tape comes in, and trust me, you'll be using a lot of duct tape. Tape down all the excess wire to the base of where your veins would be, because that's the one part that won't have lights. Now, going around to all the dots, you're going to place the wire down and then place a piece of tape over that. You don't want them to move, and do not worry because you will not be able to see the tape in the final product. So use as much tape as you need to hold this thing down. Also, this was a 20 light Christmas light thing. So I put 3 on every finger, and then the 4th will be placed on top for something I'll show you later. So count accordingly and divide it by 5 because that's how many fingers you'll need to do. This is also a pretty long process, but that's just how it goes. I've never really dealt with anything electronic before, so this is kind of new to me too. I'm really just trying to hide the wires at this point, so I'm just taping this down completely. Again, don't be shy on how much tape you use. Use as much as you see fit. I really just went all out with this and just taped it completely down. Damn, kinda looks like a Tony Stark Iron Man thing. Now that last layer was extra long, and that's because I'm going to pat it down to give it more of a smooth surface. Glue the interior and kind of give it that curve. Go around the entire arm, wrist, little by little. When you get to the battery though, just go really close to the wire. Do not do it completely. You don't want to mess up the wire at this point. And just leave a little hole. Now if you look closely at the picture, you'll see the elbow part has like these weird car spoilers. They look like car spoilers to me. That's the only way I can really describe them. Basically two parts that kind of curve up. Go ahead and measure that out twice. They're not going to be the exact length of it. They'll be a little bit shorter because they're going to overlap. I have this really thin piece here in order to give the elbow part a bit of a bump. Of course I have excess, which is good, so I could just cut off whatever I don't need. Now we're going to put that first spoiler on, and make sure you see that bend. I hope you brought a lot of glue sticks because you're going to need them. As you approach the end, make sure you have enough and just slowly pat it down. Alright, that's one layer down, one to go. The second layer will go around like that and wrap around. Once it looks great, go ahead and start gluing it on. Again, make sure that bump is very visible, because that's what it looks like on the Devil Buster. This one might take a little more caution, so just do it slowly. If you see a little bit of glue seep out, that's fine, because you'll be painting that later. Once you come to the end of it, you can cut off the excess. And glue the final part in. Making sure it's secure, I'm going to glue the interior around it. Press against it so it takes the form of melting inwards. Alright, so this next part is the red exterior that covers over the blue lights on the inside. Because I made this before the game came out, I only had that one promotional shot that they released. So I kinda just had to make up the shape as I went. I had a pretty good idea of what it looked like, but once the game came out, I'm sure they did a few tweaks. So my overall design ended up looking like a weird bone or arrow, however you want to look at it. I traced a second one to try to give it a little more definition. I'd added wings to the side. Because they'll be bent, you don't want the middle part flapping out, so I gave these things wings so that you can fold them together when placing them on. Here's a picture of what my model came out looking like. Once you're done, go ahead and trace a bunch out. And when I say bunch, I mean 5. I managed to fit 2 per paper, just because again, I always do an excess job. Just because I always end up doing excess. Once you got them all traced, start cutting them out. See, by adding the wings, I can make sure they maintain their shape. Now, as I always do, I paint the red foam red. And as always, I'm doing 3 coats just to make sure it looks good. Once the paint is dried, I do 1 layer of varnish. You might not see much on the camera, but trust me, it really comes out and makes a huge difference in the overall look. Next up, paint that part we glued together black. It's not much, but it does hide the glue a bit. Once you're done there, paint the arm spoilers. Yeah, I'm going to call them arm spoilers. Paint them red. Three coats of red paint should do. Once it dries, one more time, give it some varnish for that nice glossy color. So with those last 5 lights I told you about earlier, we're going to line those up closer to the finger, placing them upright. Now along the side from the lights, give it about an inch or so, putting dots down because you're going to have to glue a threshold down there. Once you have all your dots, line them up. So it looks something like this. Easy and gently, do 1 layer of glue. This will act as the threshold for when you lay down the grate, or train track as I've been calling it. These bumps will help hold the train track or grate in place, the blue part, i.e. With 1 layer of hot glue now, stick it on. Give it a few seconds to cool down and make sure it stays in place. Add additional glue as you see fit. Once it's locked into place, turn it around and do the same thing to the other side. There you go. Glue it in as much as you see fit in order to keep it secure. Now all you have to do is do that 4 more times. Finally, we get to the last one, and we're almost there. Make sure that sucker stays down. And bam, that's what it looks like. Now, there's one more addition to the spoilers on the back. There's like these weird little rectangles that stick out. Using a twisty tie, I bent it into shape and got close enough to the shape that I'll need. From what I could tell, there was 6 of them, so I just made 6 of them. Using a bunch of edges, I folded the foam mat into 2 so I could have a soft top, or rather a smooth top. They're all relatively going to be the same, so I made 6 in total. Once I got the shape, I traced them out and cut them into the right shape. See, they fit pretty well. Once you're done, paint them all red. Don't forget the sides, but you can leave the underneath blank if you want, because that's what we'll be gluing it down. Do any final measurements and cut them in order to be just right. and then repaint any parts that needed to be cut off. The paint drying process was probably the most tedious part. Luckily I had Titanfall 2. Every online round is about 10 to 20 minutes, so that gave me enough time in order to wet things dry. Now in order to get the varnish right, I wanted to do one layer. So I took 2 thumbtacks and a piece of cardboard and just lined them up, piercing them on top. That way I could just go around and do one layer of varnish without having to stop and wait for one side to dry. Look at that, looks pretty good, right? Now that everything's dried, I'm going to take the wings from the red covers and glue them down so they maintain their roundish shape. I know it might look silly, but trust me, it actually came in handy that I did this in the long run. So here's a little detail before you end up putting the red covers on. In between all the spaces of where the blue lights are, you should have a little gap. Cut out a thin layer of foam and measure it so it would fit in there nice and snug. On the picture, you'll see a little silver grate. I didn't follow it to a T, but I made it look pretty close. Now, when putting on the red covers, I glued them side by side to each other so they wouldn't be mismatched and out of place. Once you're ready, glue the 2 edges together. This part takes a little bit of patience, but you'll get it right. Glue it down to make sure it doesn't fall apart. No one can see the interior anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Once you're ready, just keep doing the same thing. Glue the 2 base ends of the red cover together. And just keep doing that. Once it's on just right, glue down the base part and hold it for about 10 seconds, probably longer. Repeat this process until you're out of red covers. Finally on the last one, and I'm ready to put it down. And there we go. You're all set. Take the blue strip and try to place it in there. If it still fits, you're doing things right. We're going to make little tips though on the edges of all the rectangles. So it'll be like a super duper long oval. Using a thumbtack, I made little holes in all of the blue rectangles. Just because I didn't have the ideal way of making a grate, this worked out pretty well though. It still has the holes, and it still looks like grate. Well, sort of. Do what I do best and paint them all silver, giving it 3 layers just to be safe. The nice thing about silver paint is you don't need to use the varnish either. Once you're set, glue in between each of the covers, and then pop them in, thus covering the last of the tape. Once you put the last one in, you'll start to notice, hey, this looks pretty good. Well guys, we're almost there. Now I'm going to cover the tip of the red cover by pressing it against the foam and trying to get the shape. Each one will be a bit different, so you're going to have to do this 5 times. Just keep going back and forth until you get the right shape. I did number mine according to my pinky all the way to my thumb, so I just did a 1 to 5. Once you have them all out, cut circles down the center and paint them. You know me, 3 layers of paint. Once they're all done, give them a nice layer of varnish. Once they're dry, pop them off and get your blue filter. You should still have half of it left. It is a folder after all. Go ahead and cut out a little piece, just enough to cover the circle. Glue around the rim of the circle and pop that thing on. As I'm sure you've guessed, do it for each one. Once you're all set, take a little bit of glue and put them into place. That way when they light up, you get that. Now we're almost there, but there's that last piece of tape where your veins would go. And I can't tell from the promotional picture they have, this is purely my own design. I just kind of made something up that kind of looked techie. Feel free to do whatever you want on the back. This is just what I did. And I kind of made it extravagant for no real reason. Or at least I think it looks extravagant. I could be wrong. So I go ahead and I get one last piece of flat foam and just kind of make a whatever design. If it fits, it works. But then again, it wouldn't be me if I went for basic. So I do a bit of an extravagant design. Probably more than I needed to do, but hey, it's all about the style, baby. I cut out the interior and just take a thin layer off so it looks like there's multiple layers. On both sides so they look even. I then pop holes in the middle. Not a big thing, just something to give it some layers. Same thing with the exterior. I cut a few lines, and then voila, my design. Up next, we're doing a little bit of silver. And by a little bit, you know I mean 3 layers. The design really starts to show after I do a couple of layers of paint. Once you're all set, pop some hot glue on and get ready to slap her on. Now this covers the last of the duct tape. So all that duct tape you might have been worried about, I know I was worried about when I was making it. No worries now. All covered with what looks like a modern tech look. Or just some dumb kid's design, I don't know. Or just whatever design you want. Hey, there we go. One last thing, don't forget to pop these guys on. A little bit of glue, and there you go. Each one in between each of the red 5 finger things, the covers, technically they're supposed to match up with your fingers. So if there's 5 of them, I'd do 6. 1 on each end and 4 in the middle. Give enough space on the base of where the vein would be so you can lie it down when you're not using it. And there you have it. One Devil May Cry Devil Buster arm. Now to try the Devil Buster on. First thing you're going to do is put on the black dish glove and then slide your arm through the Devil Buster's main section of the arm. Make sure your fingers are mobile. Once you're good, start placing on the claws. Don't forget, small ones are for the pinky and thumb, and the 3 big ones are for your index, middle, and ring finger. Something's not right here. Hang on. There we go. Now that is a Devil Buster. Now I hear what you're saying. Tobromancer, how do I know this is any good without a field test? Well, I read you loud and clear. So if you like this project, feel free to comment down below for future ideas. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.